This is a lesson on Chapter 3, or Chapter 11, Section 3, and it's titled Dividing Polynomials. And so we're going to use the long division method in an Algebra 1 class. Later on you'll learn that there's other methods to divide polynomials, and for right now we're going to divide a polynomial by a monomial. And so when I see something like this, what I'm going to end up doing is taking each of the terms here and dividing by whatever the monomial is. And so you can only do this when we are dividing by a monomial. So you just take what that monomial is and you just write it underneath each of these terms. And so then you're going to do some reducing. And so I see that 2 goes into 4 2 times. And I see that this 2a's here will cancel out 2 of the a's up top, leaving me just with 1a. So I know I have 2a for that first term. Over here, 2 goes into 10 5 times, and the a's cancel out. So I'm just left with a plus 5. And over here, we do not get a monomial because we'll end up dividing, and the a is left on the bottom. So when we go ahead and do that reducing, I'm left with 3 over 2a. So we divided by a monomial there, but we did not end up getting a monomial at the end of the answer. This is a polynomial, or this is a 3-term expression with a term that's not a monomial. In the denominator, we cannot have variables for it to be a monomial. So that is our answer, though. Let's take a look at the next one. Here we're dividing by a binomial, so we have 2 terms there. So we're going to use this long division method on this one here. And so what I'm going to end up doing is keeping the divisor outside this fraction bracket here, and I've put the dividend, the 2m squared minus the m minus the 3 inside. And so I'm going to go ahead and divide. Now when I divide, I'm going to multiply. I'm thinking of what term, when I multiply by m, makes 2m squared. I'm always trying to cancel out the leading term. So when I do that, I'm going to end up putting a 2m here. And what that'll do is when I do 2m times m, I end up getting a 2m squared. And that's what I want, is exactly the same term as the one I'm trying to cancel out. But when I do this, since I have a binomial I'm multiplying by, I need to multiply this quotient by both terms in that binomial. So that leaves me with a positive 2m. And so now I'm going to subtract these terms, and the 2m squareds cancel out. Here I have a negative 1m, and I'm taking away positive 2m. So what I like to do is I like to go ahead and add the opposite at this stage here. And that way I get the signs right, especially if there's more signs that are not all positive here. I've got 2 negatives. And you see when I go ahead and do that work, I have a negative 1 plus now a negative 2, and that makes a negative 3m. So I'll bring down the minus 3. Now I'm trying to cancel out the leading term of negative 3. Now in order to do that, you want to have the same term here. And so I'm going to multiply by a negative 3. And you see when I do that, negative 3 times m makes a negative 3m. Negative 3 times 1 makes a negative 3. So when I go ahead and subtract again, I'm going to add the opposite. And when you do that, you got to do it to all terms from that second binomial in this case. So the 3m's cancel out, negative 3m plus 3m. Negative 3 plus 3 makes 0. So I have a remainder of 0. So my answer is this, 2m minus 3. That's the quotient. So let's take a look at the next type of problem here, and it says that we're dividing a polynomial with 0 as a coefficient. And so what I'm looking at here is the 0 as the coefficient means that there's a missing term. So I'm trying to find out what the height is. And so remember, the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. Now on your problem you're going to end up a rectangle, so you don't have that 1/2 to deal with, but I do. So I'm trying to solve for the height. So I'm going to use the formula here and multiply by 2 to cancel out the 1/2. And that leaves me with double the area equals base times height. So I want to solve for the height, so I'm going to divide by b. So here's what I need to do. My height is double the area and then divide by b. So I'm going to take the area that I've got right here, 2c to the third plus 16, and I'm doubling that number. And then I'm going to divide by c plus 2. So when I go ahead and do that, I double each of these terms, and this is what I've got. I've got 4c to the third power plus 16. And down below, I've got this c plus 2. So what I'm going to end up doing now is I'm going to divide. I'm not sure how many times c plus 2 goes in there. Not sure. This doesn't factor very well. It looks like a difference of squares, but it's not. It's a sum, and this isn't even a perfect square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put c plus 2 as the divisor, and I'm going to extend this line here and that vinculum so that I can add in some missing terms. So I've got a 4c to the third. Now I don't have a c to the second, so it's like a place value that's missing, and I need to add a place value for that. So I'm going to add 0 times c to the second. I'm going to add the 0 times c because that's the place value missing for this term, and then I can write the 16. So just as you would with a number like this, like 4002. See, the number 4002, I have to have these place values, these placeholders, to represent that this 2 is in the ones and the 4s in the thousands place. If I didn't put those place values there, placeholders there, the number would be 42, and that wouldn't make sense. Those aren't the same number. So that's why I need these extra placeholders here. So I'm trying to cancel out the 4c to the third. So I'm going to multiply c by a number to make 4c to the third. I'm going to use 4c squared, because 4c squared times c makes 4c to the third. Now I multiply 4c squared times 2, and that makes an 8c squared. So when I go ahead and subtract, I'm going to add the opposite. So I add the opposite there, and I go ahead and do that work, and I cancel out the c to the thirds, the 4c to the thirds. Now this term makes a negative 8c squared. So I bring down the 0c, and now I'm trying to cancel out this leading term, this negative 8c squared. So to make that, I've got to multiply c by some number to make negative 8c squared, and that's going to be negative 8c. So I go ahead and multiply, I get negative 8c squared, and then a minus 16c. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract, but when I subtract, again, you've got to add the opposite. So I go ahead and do that work, and here's what I get. The 8c squareds cancel out, and I'm left with 16c. And then I bring down the plus 16. So now I'm trying to cancel out the 16c. So I'm going to go ahead and add a 16 here. And the reason why is 16 times c makes 16c. 16 times 2 makes 32. And I go ahead and subtract. And again, you're adding the opposite. Real important to do that. This is 16c there, because that way you'll see what sign you should, or what operation we should be doing with those last two terms. So I go ahead and do that work. The 16c's cancel out, and I'm left with a negative 16. So this is my remainder. And the remainder, what we're going to do is just like a remainder when we're dealing with long division, I'm going to write it as a mixed number. So we're going to write plus the remainder, negative 16, over the divisor, c plus 2. And that's my answer right there. So on this next term here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and let's see here. Actually, I see a mistake I made on that last problem here, so let's fix it real quick. So what I made a mistake on here is when I went ahead and doubled 2, I doubled the 4c, or the 2c to the third to make 4c to the third, but I did not double the 16. So that does end up making a 32. So this is going to end up working without a remainder. So let's go ahead and fix that now. So I've got a 32 for that last term. So when I go ahead and put the 32 here, again, that's a 32 because I didn't multiply the 2 by the 16. And so now I have that done correctly. And when I go ahead and do this work, I don't have that remainder. So I'll go ahead and erase this remainder here. I have a remainder of 0 now. And that means that I have no extra parts. This did divide in evenly in this case here. So this is our answer. 4c to the second minus 8c plus 16. And this is a height. And so I better put some units in there. I don't know what the units are, so I'll just put in units. So let's take a look at this problem here. And here we've got to reorder terms. And so it's important to make sure, again, we have 0, a placeholder, 0 times that expression, like 0c squared and 0c here. So we're going to need that with this one, but I also need to order these correctly. So I'm going to order them in descending order. So I'm going to write 3y minus 5, and then in the dividend, I'm going to write down the 9y to the third, and then I have that placeholder, 0y squared, because I don't have a y squared term here, and then the plus 4y and the minus 7. So I go ahead and start the division process now. So I'm trying to cancel out the 9y squared, so I'm going to put a 3y squared here. And that goes right above the y squared in this term here, and I multiply the quotient by the divisor, and I'm left with a 9y to the third minus 15y squared. So you see, if I do this right, everything lines up. That's going to combine together, and all the like terms are there. So we'll subtract, but again, we're going to add the opposite. So add the opposite there, and what that gives me is a 15y squared. I'll bring down the positive 4y, and now I'll go ahead and figure out what multiplies by 3y to make 15y squared. Well, that's going to be just a 5y. So we do that multiplication, we get 15y squared, and then minus 25y. So we go ahead and subtract, but we're going to add the opposite here. So we add the opposite, and that leaves me with a 29y minus the 7. So when I go ahead and multiply 3 by a number to make 29, so I'm trying to cancel that term out. So now I'm trying to cancel out that 29, and so I've got to multiply 3 by a number to make 29y. So I'm going to multiply by 29 thirds. So let me fix that number real quick. 29 thirds. And you see, if I do 29 thirds times 3y, the 3's cancel out, and I'm left with 29y. So I've got 29y, and then I have to multiply 29 by 5, and then divide by 3. So I've got 29. Let me go ahead and pull this up here. Calculator there, and I'll do 29 times by 5, and that gives me 145. So I've got a positive 145 thirds. And so from here, I've got to go ahead and subtract these numbers. Now, when I subtract, I add the opposite, and this becomes a negative 145 thirds. So I've got to do this work here. So negative 7 over 1, and I'm subtracting 145 over 3. So I'm going to change this to negative 21 thirds minus 145 thirds. And so when I do that work, I add these two numbers, and that makes a 6, and a 1. 166 over 3. And let's see if it goes in there. See, if I add the digits, 1 plus 6 makes 7, plus 6 makes 13. So no, it doesn't go in there. So my remainder is 166 thirds. And so the way I'm going to write that is this. I've got plus, I take the remainder, 166 thirds, and then I write that over the divisor. So that's 3y minus 5. And so this is a real messy problem here. But basically, whatever your remainder is, you take that number and you write it in the numerator of a fraction, and you take the divisor that you've been dividing by goes in the denominator. So those are the types of problems that you're going to see on tonight's assignment. Good luck.